Can you imagine your own father refusing to walk you down the aisle, all because your entitled sister convinced him he could only do it once? And then, just days before your wedding, she ditched him for someone richer, leaving him utterly heartbroken and crawling back to me, begging for a second chance? Oh, the sweet, sweet taste of karma. It truly is served piping hot, and honestly, I've never been happier. I know it might sound awful to say, but for years, I've lived with the heavy weight of trauma and emotional neglect, all thanks to my dad. Now, seeing him with nowhere else to turn, suddenly remembering the daughter he barely acknowledged, it's a twisted kind of justice, and I don't care if that makes me a bad person. This is my story, and trust me, it's been a long time coming. I'm the middle of 3 siblings. There's my older brother, Finley, who we call Finn, and my younger sister, Sarah. Growing up, our family looked pretty normal from the outside. My mom, bless her heart, always tried her best to be an equal parent. But my dad? He made his favoritism painfully obvious. Sarah was his little princess, the apple of his eye. And Finn, well, he was the son, someone to bond with over man things. So, naturally, I was just there, excluded. From a very young age, I always felt like Dad didn't really like me. I tried to voice it, usually through tantrums, because honestly, I was a difficult kid back then. But nothing I ever did seemed to make him pay attention. So, as I got older, I just accepted it. I think Mom saw what was happening, and she tried to compensate. She was and still is an equal parent, loving us all the same, and I adore her for seeing me, for not letting me completely fade into invisibility. Finn saw it too. He saw my neglect, how I was always a bit aloof, and he tried to fill that void. He'd actually asked Dad to let me come along when he taught him how to change car tires, or when he was learning to drive. Dad would never include me in those conversations himself. It wasn't like I was abused or they got different gifts. Sarah and I got the same number of new dresses. Finn got his things. It was the emotional neglect, the feeling that I simply wasn't important to him. Mom and Finn were the ones who tried to mend that hole in my heart. Sarah, on the other hand, absolutely loved being the little princess. She was a snobby, entitled kid. Her school even raised concerns about her attitude, but Dad brushed everything under the carpet. She grew into a truly exhausting young woman, and honestly, we're not close. Finn and I, though, we're thick as thieves, and he genuinely cannot stand Sarah. The only person who doesn't see a problem with her behavior is Dad. Mom just tolerates her. So, that's our dynamic. About 10 years ago, Mom and Dad divorced. It was amicable, or so they said, but they kept the real reason a secret from us. They claimed they weren't compatible anymore, but we all knew that was a lie. I don't think it was infidelity, because neither of them dated for a long time afterward. To this day, we still don't know what truly happened, and they've always preferred to keep it that way. We were all adults by then, so no custody battles. They've been mostly on good terms since. Personally, I haven't visited Dad much. Let's be honest, there was no love lost between us. He never complained about my absence, so I guess it suited us both. I usually went to Mom's place. Finn and Sarah split their time, but Finn and I often coordinated our visits to Mom's, always avoiding Sarah. He really just couldn't tolerate her. From the outside, we looked like a pretty functional family. But then, things took a turn. And honestly, I'm thrilled about it. 5 years ago, Mom started dating Arthur. They met at a yoga retreat and instantly clicked. He's a genuinely cool guy. He's great to Finn and me, always respectful. I assume he's okay with Sarah too, as no one's ever said otherwise. Mom is happy, and that's all that matters. Arthur is even cordial with Dad, even though Dad gives him a lot of attitude. I think it's because Dad's dating life hasn't been successful, and he doesn't have a stable partner. Plus, Arthur earns significantly more than Dad, and Mom's life is far more luxurious now than it was with Dad. We're all happy for Mom, but Dad? He's bitter. And he hates that we have a good relationship with Arthur. Finn has tried to explain that Arthur isn't replacing him, that we're just being sensible adults, but Dad acts jealous. It's childish and, frankly, off-putting. Thankfully, I don't have to deal with it much because I don't see Dad often. So that's the family backstory. Important context for what happened recently. A few months ago, my fiancé, Kieran, proposed. We'd been together a long time. I didn't shout it from the rooftops immediately because I value my privacy, but we wanted a short engagement and a quick wedding. So, we told our families once we set the date, it was just a week away. When I told my family, the reactions were mixed. Finn, Mom, and Arthur were overjoyed. Dad had a pretty normal reaction. But Sarah? She seemed quite upset. It was a video call, and I could see her force a smile before disconnecting quickly. I expected a tantrum. She hates not being the center of attention. But I just couldn't be bothered with her drama. Later, I called Finn separately to gossip. I also told him I wanted him, not Dad, to walk me down the aisle. He was quiet for a moment. He said he was incredibly touched, but felt it was inappropriate, worried Dad would make a huge fuss. He said he'd love to do it, but couldn't because he didn't want to upset Dad. I was hurt. I told him that I came to him because Dad had repeatedly failed me, and Finn had been more of a protective male figure than Dad ever was. It was an emotional conversation, and I hate to admit it, but he also made sense. I didn't fight him. He gently reminded me that whether or not he walked me down the aisle wasn't as important as having a day free of drama, a day I could look back on happily. He said if he took Dad's place, Dad would be pissy and ruin the whole thing. He was right. Dad was absolutely capable of that stunt. I knew Finn's advice would make my day easier, even if not ideal. He told me to talk to Dad about it, which I was incredibly reluctant to do. I said I'd think about it. Then, thankfully, 2 weeks later, Sarah announced her engagement to Zach. Kieran and I exchanged looks. I knew she'd try to upstage my wedding. Finn wasn't happy either. We both understood her timing was off, but what could we do? We had to stay quiet. One good thing, Sarah's wedding date was a month after mine, about 5 weeks from then. She had desperately tried to get married before me, but the stars just didn't align. She had to settle for being the second bride in the family, and she was salty about it. She even tried to guilt-trip me into postponing my wedding, but I stood firm. I wasn't going to pander to her whims. So, things stayed as they were. However, apparently, Dad and Sarah had a secret pact. He would walk her down the aisle first, before walking me. I have no idea how they came up with something so twisted. I guess they assumed I'd never get married, or would get married much later, given my past luck with boys in school and college. So, when I finally asked Dad to walk me down the aisle, this was after Sarah had announced her engagement. Mind you, he regretfully told me, "Oh, my baby girl, I promised her years ago that I'd walk her down the aisle first." He even claimed she was on her deathbed when he made this promise, which never happened, by the way. He said he couldn't go back on his word and break her heart, so he couldn't walk me down the aisle. I won't lie. Internally, I was ecstatic. I didn't want him walking me anyway. I pretended to be so sad and hurt, telling him I respected his promise to Sarah, and while it pained me deeply, I accepted it. It didn't hurt at all, just for the record. I immediately called Finn and told him what happened. He was absolutely furious with Dad. He said if he'd known Dad would pull a stunt like that, he would have jumped at the chance when I first asked him. He declared that if Dad could choose which daughter to give this privilege to, so could I. He was mad, but I was just too happy to care. Everything had fallen into place exactly as I wanted it. Things were going well, despite the wedding planning stress. I was jittery and nervous, but everything seemed on track, until yesterday. That's when unprecedented drama crashed into my life, and I honestly had zero stamina for it. Last evening, Sarah informed Dad that he wouldn't be walking her down the aisle. She asked Arthur to do it instead. It completely shocked all of us. She did it over video call, no less. It was brutal, and she could have been much more sensitive about it. We all knew Dad was looking forward to her wedding. He was even paying for all of it, because she and Zach wanted to save money for their honeymoon. Mom and Dad had been swamped helping plan 2 weddings. Dad had mentally checked out of mine completely. No input, no suggestions, just utter disinterest. All his focus was on Sarah. He hadn't contributed a single dime to my wedding. Kieran and I were funding it ourselves. It had gotten so bad that I was relying more on Mom and Arthur's approval for suggestions than Dad's. Arthur was actually involved in my wedding planning, which was definitely not the case for Sarah. That's why even Arthur looked taken aback by Sarah's request, or rather, her demand. He didn't know how to respond and kept looking at Mom. We were all speechless. Mom eventually said Arthur would love to do it. It was one of the worst calls I've ever been on, and I work in corporate, so bad calls are kind of my staple. By then, Dad was in tears. Instead of talking to Sarah, he started cussing out Arthur and disconnected the call. And that was that. I'm sure the others asked how he was feeling, but I didn't. I had other things to worry about, so I promptly exited the call. Besides, this wasn't my issue. It was a promise between Sarah and him, one he hadn't wanted to break. If she broke it, that was between them. I had no intention of intervening. They could sort it out. I had no role, and this was not the time for petty family issues that didn't concern me. Little did I know, it would concern me very soon. To my utter annoyance, Dad called me last night, in tears. This was just a few hours after the devastating blow his little princess had inflicted. He was sobbing, telling me he was a fool for rejecting my offer of letting him walk me down the aisle. He'd love to do it for me now. I couldn't believe my ears. The sheer entitlement was shocking. I told him, very gently, that while I felt sad for what had happened, it was between Sarah and him. It in no way changed my wedding plans. I reminded him that Finn was walking me down the aisle, that it had been decided months ago, and I couldn't change it at the last minute. He insisted he would talk to Finn, saying Finn was just a placeholder anyway, and I didn't need to worry about Finn not agreeing. I told him it wasn't about Finn not agreeing. I didn't want to hurt Finn. And secretly, I didn't want him to walk me down the aisle in the first place, but he didn't need to know that. He kept insisting he would talk to Finn and set things straight, like they should be. But I told him a swap wasn't happening. Finn would be walking me down the aisle, and that was final. He was in complete denial, thinking I was only resisting because Finn wouldn't step down, and he was confident he could talk Finn out of it. I disconnected the call and immediately called Finn. I told him everything Dad had said. To say Finn was livid would be an understatement. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I'd always wanted him to give me away. He was the first person I'd asked, and it was only at his insistence that I'd even approached Dad. He asked if I was sure I wanted him to walk me. I said yes. He then told me not to worry about anything, that he would set Dad straight if Dad dared to call him. I told Finn I didn't want any drama at the wedding. Dad needed to understand he couldn't just breeze in and out of my life, using me as a replacement daughter just because his favorite had kicked him to the curb. Finn told me not to worry. He'd make sure Dad knew there were no changes to the wedding plans. That was last night. I haven't heard from either of them since, and it's driving me sick with anxiety. Everything was going so smoothly, and I just don't have the stamina for this drama right now. I don't even know if I should talk to them, or what's happened between Finn and Dad. It's truly nauseating. Update 1, asterisk. I finally spoke to Finn, and things are a mess. Worse than I thought, actually. But thankfully, he's got most of it handled, so it won't spill over into my wedding. Finn said he was waiting for Dad to call him about the change of plans, but the call never came. That's when Finn realized Dad wasn't even going to discuss it. He just assumed that. Because he decided he'd be walking me down the aisle, everyone else would automatically be okay with it. Finn waited a day, but when Dad didn't reach out, Finn called him. He asked Dad if there was a change of plans because I'd mentioned something. Dad tried to act all nonchalant, saying I had asked him to walk me down since Sarah wasn't doing it anymore. Now, Finn is usually the diplomatic one, the sensible and level-headed one out of the three of us. So when he told me he went full-on ballistic on Dad, I was genuinely shocked. Finn said he told Dad to cut the crap, and that they both knew I hadn't asked him. Dad was the one who'd begged for the role only after his favorite daughter had kicked him to the curb. When Dad heard this, he was obviously furious. He has this terrible habit of reacting viciously when confronted with the truth, or anything he doesn't want to hear. But before Dad could interrupt, Finn told him to shut the hell up for once and listen. He said Dad should be grateful he was even getting an invite to my wedding, considering how he'd treated me all these years. And then, Finn tore into him. He apologized to me later, saying he knew it wasn't his place to lash out at Dad, especially days before my wedding, but he just couldn't control himself. He said he wanted Dad to know what he really was, to shake him out of this facade he was living in. Finn said everything. He said Dad had always favored Sarah, and would at least try with him, but I was always just an afterthought, an idiot. And I knew it was true. He reminded Dad that I had actually asked Finn first, that he was my first choice, but Finn had pushed me to ask Dad, hoping Dad would finally step up and try to mend our relationship. He said Dad blew his chance. Finn called him a failure of a dad because none of his 3 kids loved or respected him. Finn didn't respect him because he couldn't be a fair parent. I didn't respect him because he never bothered to love me like a daughter. And even Sarah didn't respect him because if she did, she wouldn't have pulled that stunt. Finn told Dad that Sarah growing up entitled was his fault because he was the one who had pampered her. He said Sarah's horrible personality was Dad's creation, and it served him right that he was discarded by his favorite child because he'd been discarding us since we were born. LD her to eat dirt. I reminded her she was funding her wedding on Dad's money, and then kicked him out. I told her I'd gone to Dad, and he had chosen to only walk her down the aisle because of some stupid promise she couldn't honor. If she was so hurt that her dear old daddy was miserable, she was more than welcome to switch things back at her wedding. I even offered to talk to Arthur for her, since she was feeling so bad. She didn't have much to say to that, and cut the call. I called Finn right away, and told him I didn't want to be part of any more dad drama before the wedding. I said it was his responsibility to ensure none of it came to me. I was done. I had 100 other things to worry about or be excited about, and I couldn't let Dad ruin my day. He had already made me miserable for most of my life, and I couldn't have him take away the most special day of my life too. Finn told me not to worry, and that he would take care of everything. To say I was racked with nerves on my wedding day would be an understatement. But thankfully, everything was under control. Dad looked quite sullen, but he didn't try to start any crap, so I'm thankful for that. After a point, I was too busy enjoying myself to even worry about his pouty face. Sarah tried to stay as far away from Dad as possible. It was quite awkward between them, but again, I just didn't care. The wedding went beautifully. I'm so glad nobody could dampen the day. When Finn walked me down the aisle, I could feel Dad glaring daggers at my back, but that was all he could do. I've been told a couple people asked why Finn was up there and not Dad, and now Dad's left to do some damage control. But hey, that's his cross to bear. I just want Sarah's wedding to be done too, so there's no more drama, and I can finally live in peace. Once her wedding is over, I'm going low contact with Dad for the foreseeable future. I honestly don't see the point of staying in touch with him. Update 3 *. Sarah got married yesterday. I wouldn't know how it went firsthand, because she uninvited both Kieran and me from the wedding. I don't know what she hoped to achieve by that, but I was more than happy to sit it out. To her dismay, even Finn didn't go. So it was just Mom, Arthur, and Dad there. Dad was apparently hopeful that she would change her mind at the last minute and have him walk her down the aisle. But that never happened. Mom called me to give me all the details. She said it was uncomfortable as hell. From the photos Sarah posted, it's clear Arthur would rather have been anywhere else. Dad is sullen. Arthur is uncomfortable, and Mom? She's just done. Other than that, Sarah seems fine. Her wedding went well too, not that I care. Mom said Dad is miserable, naturally. He had been holding out hope that at least one of us would eventually succumb and let him have his way. But now all of his kids are practically estranged from him. His personal life is a mess as well, and he is not taking it well at all. And you know what? I couldn't care less. I honestly feel it serves him right for being such a shitty father to me, for giving me a horrible childhood, and for actively contributing to it. This feeling of justice, it's incredible. What do you think? If you were in my shoes, would you have reacted the same way? Have you ever had a moment of sweet karma like this in your own life? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know.